there was so much I agreed with in what she said about the focus needing to be on all sorts of groups who don't feel themselves part of the society that has been created, in a sense, for them, with them living in it, and not feeling of it. I also think that I think some of the criticisms of the last Prevent strategy are fair, some are less fair, because one of the things that was done, certainly with Hazel Blair, who's no good friend of mine, but she did open up the space for some quite interesting and, if you like, radical organizational ideas around Muslims in Britain. So it wasn't always the same old kind of funding arrangements which Labour had become habituated to. So, for example, I was the chair until recently of something called British Muslims for Secular Democracy, because I was sick to death of everybody talking about what Islam says, as if all we do all day long is sit and ponder what Islam says. We have work, we have jobs, we live in a democracy. And even those children born here within some Muslim groups, including in this city, hadn't even understood the beginnings of what democracy means. If they voted for who their dads told them to vote for. And their dads voted for who the community leader told them to vote for. So we developed this whole thing about actually educating and giving young Muslims and women that entitlement which was theirs, which actually the poorest people in Pakistan seem to understand better than some of the families I met in Bradford. So, and these were funded, which were quite interesting. But I want to go back to the title. I really think that though you are wonderful people, the ethnic minority Liberal Democrats, I think you should be much more impatient and much more angry with your party, because this is something now way beyond its sell-by date, that you should be having to have this debate under this title, I think really should shame the party. Because if you don't want to talk about if you want to talk about multiculturalism, what was wrong with it, this is what's wrong with it, and Lib Dems aren't taking enough notice. They say very nice things. They speak very well. I know Nick Clegg, I wrote a paper for him a couple of years ago, all that. It really isn't good enough. That, the party still is now more white in its representation than even the Tories. I think this is something it is so astonishing to me. And the patience that I've heard in the last 2 days from various people I've talked to, it takes time. Well, it shouldn't take time. We're now in the 21st century. If we really mean social cohesion, the party has to put its money where its mouth is. I really don't think this is good. I really don't. Because for as long as there is this divide, that there is the real business of politics, which parties conduct, and then there are these strange people on the fringes, whom we must invite in once in a while. It doesn't give the idea of the kind of nation you talk so movingly about. I mean, I agree with you on that. So I think we have to start with that.
And I agree with you on that as well.
Because the multicultural settlement is now, I don't think multiculturalism was a bad thing when it started under Thatcherism. It was a really important kind of resistance to a state which didn't even want to recognize our rights and our presence. It was a really big, brave thing that was done. And I know everybody thinks it's very fashionable to now slag it off, but in its time, at that time, historically, it was one of the most important forms of resistance to the telling of history, to the education of children with Ken Livingstone, Ilya, all of that. But things that are suitable for one historical moment are not necessarily suitable for another, and we've arrived in a different place. So what would help cohesion? I'll talk about Prevent in a minute again. I think when multiculturalism has become the excuse for racism, for exclusion, for self-exclusion too. You know, we must be allowed to do whatever we want within this thing called community. Never mind that so many fundamental rights are violated. It's also a way of registering contempt for our presence here. So I really think there are very serious problems with it now. Of course, people in this room might not know this. It's just a continuation of an imperial model of doing business with the natives. And actually the natives are now natives of Britain. So you don't do business with us like you did business with the villagers in India, you know, wherever. I think we also, when we look at yesterday people were arrested in this town, in this city. I'm never going to underestimate the threat or the danger that is posed in this country, largely by I don't know how big the group is. I haven't the evidence to tell you it's only a small minority. I really don't have that evidence. I think it's shocking to me that students in university, the most highly educated sometimes, who have had every life chance that their fathers and mothers did not, are getting into this. So I'm not going to underestimate the problem. And the bedrock of those problems we barely have begun to explore. But what is not desirable is overreaction. I mean, I thought the wonderful, well, not wonderful, what an extraordinary response from the father when he stood up and said what he did. What was extraordinary was not just that he was able to do that, but that A.N. Wilson, who is a right-wing journalist with the Daily Mail, wrote a column in which he said, when he heard this man, he thought, for all these years, Muslims have been demonized, and we should all, in his words, we who have done that, should all feel ashamed at the way we have described them as terrorists. Now, that coming from A.N. Wilson over the action of one father was extraordinary to me, right? So there was a recognition that there is overreaction, and but not as much as in the US, and I think in this country actually we've been lucky. So when we're talking about the prevent agenda, here are government policies or government relationships that I think are at the heart of the problem, which are not being addressed. They weren't addressed by Labour, they're not being addressed by Lib Dems and Tories either. The spread of Wahhabi Islam in this country is entirely due to the presence of the Saudi Arabian money and influence. It started when they sent their men and money into this country 10 years ago. They have a project. They've gone into every city, they've gone into every locality where there are Muslims. We are not dealing with that crucial problem. We still maintain relationships with Saudi Arabia because, for obvious reasons. Unless we stop the Saudis on this project, our terrorism is not going to be dealt with in any meaningful way, whatever prevent strategies the government dreams up. The problem is clear. I've been in Egypt, I've spent weeks in the Middle East, I've just got back. The same project is operating there. Here, when I tell them that in Leicester, which was the most open-minded city 10 years ago, it is now completely in the grip of Saudi Islam. Completely, to the point where state-funded secondary school that I went to a few years ago, the girls were fully burqa'd. My money, your money, is going into this, and it is all being pushed by the Saudis. So if this government does not address that problem, it cannot stop terrorism. It's as clear as that. The second important thing is to look at education. They talk about cohesion, and I think they mean cohesion. So why are faith-based schools being funded left, right, and centre? And the free, whatever these free, Michael Gove's strange Martian free schools, yeah, which are kind of extreme right-wingers and all sorts of people who can set up a school. Creationists can set up schools now. But the important thing is, if you mean cohesion, then you can't at the same time be encouraging an education system which is now separating our children. You can't do that to our children. Okay? I think foreign policies, however much they try and say our foreign policies have no impact, the highly educated Muslims in this country are no longer fobbed off by lies. So whatever we did in Iraq, the whole Palestinian issue, and of course, the very problematic intervention in Libya, which, you can have views about. The foreign policy connection cannot be denied. Now, I don't mean to say that the nation should, because it's scared of bombs, therefore should not do what it feels it needs to, but these are issues. Just end on a couple of two very important things. One is that with PREVENT, I think education is one of the things we can do, but the other is to make, and I was so pleased to hear what you said, that the exclusion of white people, the exclusion of all sorts of people is what the problem is. And here I'm very torn. When you promote localism, or you promote big society, human nature is tribal. We are all tribal. The great challenge is not to be tribal. What happens is, just like with the gypsies, localism immediately creates insiders and outsiders, the deserving and the undeserving. And if gypsies are maligned, you should hear what people say about asylum seekers and refugees in the area in which I live. So I think localism also needs to be rethought because it has great dangers. It creates a mass of people who identify with each other, and together, consciously and unconsciously, they make others feel like outsiders. And this could be any ethnic group, and it could be white Britons, and it could be you and I. It's what we do naturally. And and localism is fostering that, and big society is asking us to follow this through. The repercussions will be a more divided society. And then there will be people who will think, the rioters, in my view, didn't come from nowhere. They came from the society we have created for them.